how arguments became institutions. It began not with buildings or charters, but with disagreement, sharp voices in crowded rooms, competing visions of how money should move, who should bear risk, and where authority should rest. These arguments seemed temporary at first, heated debates that would fade with compromise. Instead, they hardened into structures that would outlast everyone who fought over them. London was a city of constant dispute. Merchants argued with merchants. Financiers clashed with lawmakers. Guilds resisted reformers. Every innovation triggered resistance, and every crisis reopened old wounds. Yet beneath this noise, something unusual was happening. The city was learning to preserve conflict rather than resolve it. To understand why this mattered, we must return to a time when disagreement threatened stability. Each crisis exposed fault lines between risk and safety, freedom and control, speed and caution. London could not afford to choose one side permanently. Its power came from balancing opposites. But balance required memory. The reveal emerged when the city began encoding arguments into rules. Instead of settling disputes once, it built frameworks that assumed disagreement would continue. Institutions were designed to absorb tension rather than eliminate it. Competing interests were given formal roles. Checks were embedded. No side was allowed final victory. What had once been loud confrontation became procedural friction. Debates moved from streets into committees. Conflicts turned into mandates. The very disagreements that once threatened collapse became the foundation of governance. London was no longer trying to end arguments. It was learning how to make them permanent and productive. As arguments hardened into structure, London's financial world gained a new kind of stability. Decisions slowed, but they endured. No single faction could dominate without challenge. Each interest faced resistance by design. What once felt inefficient now proved resilient. Institutions emerged that mirrored conflict itself. Boards balanced competing priorities. Oversight bodies existed not to eliminate risk, but to argue about it continuously. Regulations were crafted with exceptions built in, acknowledging that no rule could fit every circumstance. Disagreement became procedural. This transformation reshaped power. Influence no longer flowed solely through wealth or access. It moved through participation. Those who could argue effectively within institutions gained voice. Those who could not adapt found themselves sidelined. Authority became less personal and more architectural. Tension persisted, but it changed form. Instead of sudden crises, the city experienced constant negotiation. Pressure released gradually rather than violently. Markets adjusted to expectation of friction. Stability emerged not from consensus, but from managed opposition. Yet the system carried cost. Innovation slowed. Decisions required compromise. Frustration simmered among those who longed for decisive control. Critics argued that institutionalized argument diluted accountability. Supporters countered that it preserved it. The conflict deepened when external shocks tested these structures. Emergencies demanded speed. Institutions designed for debate struggled to respond. London faced a paradox. The systems that prevented collapse during normal times risked paralysis during crisis. The city now stood at a familiar crossroads. Could arguments made permanent still adapt to urgency? Or had stability been purchased at the cost of responsiveness? The answer would shape the next phase of London's financial evolution. The paradox revealed itself during moments when London could not afford to hesitate. Crises demanded action, yet institutions designed to preserve disagreement resisted speed. Committees convened, authorities consulted, arguments resurfaced. Carefully structured, meticulously balanced, and painfully slow. The very safeguards that prevented domination now delayed response. Pressure mounted as markets waited for clarity that did not arrive. Uncertainty lingered longer than it should have. Opportunities slipped away. Critics seized a moment, claiming the city had built a machine too complex to steer under stress. They argued that permanent disagreement, left unchecked, could become permanent indecision. Inside the institutions, the strain was felt acutely. Members recognized the danger, but disagreed on the solution. Some pushed for emergency powers, temporary suspensions of debate to restore momentum. Others warned that bypassing structure, even briefly, risked unraveling the balance that kept power contained. The argument turned inward, testing the very logic of institutionalized conflict. The conflict reached a peak when a critical decision was delayed just long enough to magnify losses. Nothing catastrophic occurred, but the message was clear. The system had protected fairness, but it had failed urgency. London confronted a difficult truth. Disagreement could be preserved forever, but time could not. The response was not abandonment, but refinement. Mechanisms were introduced to distinguish routine debate from extraordinary necessity. Thresholds were defined. Emergency pathways outlined. Disagreement remained central, but it gained boundaries. Institutions learned when to argue and when to act. This adjustment restored confidence. Markets adapted to the rhythm of structured debate, knowing that exceptional moments would trigger decisive response. Stability and responsiveness, once opposing forces, were brought into uneasy alignment. London had not resolved its arguments. It had learned to pace them. And in doing so, it transformed conflict from a threat into a tool, one capable of sustaining both order and motion. The resolution marked a quiet turning point in how London understood power. Arguments were no longer seen as obstacles to overcome, nor as threats to suppress. They became infrastructure, carefully designed, continuously maintained, and deliberately constrained. The city had learned that disagreement, when shaped correctly, could outlast certainty. Institutions matured. Emergency powers existed, but only within defined limits. Debate remained permanent, but paralysis did not. Authority flowed through process rather than personality. London no longer depended on the wisdom of individuals alone. It relied on systems that assumed conflict would never disappear. This shift carried a deeper consequence. Responsibility became distributed. No single actor could claim full credit for success or escape blame for failure. Outcomes were collective. Accountability became slower, but sturdier. The city traded dramatic leadership for institutional memory. Critics remained. Some still argued that arguments dulled ambition, that compromise weakened vision. Yet London's resilience told a different story. When shocks arrived, the city bent rather than broke. Disputes continued, but they no longer threatened collapse. Looking back, the lesson was unmistakable. Stability does not come from agreement. It comes from structures that allow disagreement to persist without tearing the system apart. London's strength was not consensus. It was containment. The arguments never ended. They became the city's most enduring institutions. Subscribe to join the journey. How